And this allows the organization to make really sustained responses in the tone of voice of the organization and, of course, its brand. Now, organizations don't come to this understanding easily. That is, most organizations have to go through some painful moments in their lives, just as individuals do as they're growing up. I see a smile on Thomas's face because he's from McDonald's. McDonald's faced exactly this kind of situation a few years back when Super Size Me, the film, was made public. And I imagine most of you have seen Super Size Me. Anyone not know this film? Yeah, it's pretty much part of the popular culture these days. This could not have been a happy moment for McDonald's. It was kind of in-your-face criticism that perhaps some could have hoped would not make as big of a splash as it did worldwide. But once it was out there, it wasn't something that could be easily taken back. Sometimes as corporations, we think maybe we can sue and prevent these sorts of things from happening. I actually applaud these kinds of moments in an organization's history because they are opportunities to really hear what people think of you. And you need that full range, the critics as well as the fans, in order to have a healthy, active, balanced identity conversation. So it's not necessarily as horrible as it seems when these things happen to you. Of course it creates discomfort inside the organization. And of course it's not a fun time for anybody in communications or even the rest of the organization when one of these things is perpetrated upon you. But if you can celebrate and say, this is honestly a point of contact between us and the outside world, and respond in an appropriate way, you can take even the worst kinds of situations like this and turn them around. And McDonald's, I believe, has learned to do this. One of the things I'm given to understand about the initial response to Super Size Me was that, at least in the American side of the corporation, they really wanted to be just not deal with it. This is something that if we just ignore it, maybe it will go away. But of course, that fantasy doesn't last very long. And the next thing becomes, how do we respond to this? How do we effectively deal with the situation that we're facing? And one of the interesting things was that McDonald's then began to have conversations with the people that were pressuring them to deal with obesity issues and others. And through work with NGOs, it came to pass that the company realized that many people outside the organization saw them as having enormous influence, particularly over children, and that they had this harbored a fantasy that if McDonald's just advertised healthy foods, the whole world would be better off and obesity would go away. Well, of course, the company says that's silly. We can't simply, we've tried to offer healthy foods in the past. There are people who really want hamburgers and French fries, and so the whole business is not just going to be able to turn itself to fixing problems that exist in the larger society. Having those kinds of conversations and getting realistic about what the problems are that are confronting the organization is what we mean by having a healthy conversation. And it's out of that conversation that I believe the real organizational identity that we can work with in our branding becomes apparent to us. It is, again, a matter of listening and responding. Now, I want to give you a very quick example of this model in action, one that's quite obvious, and so it's easy to keep in your head if you ever forget about the conversation. This example comes from Intel. Has anyone not heard of Intel? I never get a yes to that question anymore. 25 years ago, that wasn't true. 25 years ago, nobody had heard of Intel. And the company had an issue with that. The employees did. They would go to picnics and barbecues, as you do on weekends, and people would say, well, who do you work for? Well, I work for Intel. And of course, they were quite proud because this was a company that was producing products that were very high quality and very important in the world of computing. But the response they got was quite stunning. Intel? Ah, you work for the CIA, eh? Well, no. Internally in the organization, the marketing folks had a similar problem. This was an engineering firm. Marketing didn't matter because if we build it, they will come. It's going to be okay. It doesn't matter. You guys are soft and fluffy, and we're hard and serious. So what are we going to do about this? the two marketing people said to each other. Well, they saw the opportunity of this sense that nobody has any brand awareness as a possibility to make their mark in the company. As marketers, of course, they wanted to prove their worth, and one of the ways to do that was to increase brand awareness and point out what the value of that is on the bottom line. So they concocted a way to deal with the brand awareness problem, and it's now really part of history what they did. They came up with this campaign, now the subject of many marketing courses, sometimes referred to as ingredient branding, and now a part of the history of business schools and the heritage that you receive when you study. But at the time, it was a brilliant campaign, and it solved the brand awareness problem in a very unique way. The company didn't immediately solve this problem with the Intel Inside campaign. As you may remember, the way it worked was you asked your computer companies, your customers, to put a sticker on the outside of the computer box that declared the presence of your product inside. Well, initially this campaign slogan was not Intel Inside, but Intel the computer inside. And the idea the company had was to declare and claim ownership of the brains of the machine. Well, you can imagine what the customers must have thought. You know, you want to put a sticker on the outside of my computer box that says Intel the computer inside. And then who am I? What am I doing here? So, of course, that didn't work. They had to go back to the drawing board, and what they came up with was this truncated slogan, Intel Inside, and a sales campaign, a marketing campaign that was quite effective. What Intel did was they offered the computer manufacturers who put the sticker on their boxes a budget of half the amount of money. They matched the amount of money that they had in their advertising budgets. That's a fairly bold move. But it worked. And it not only got brand awareness, but it began to create demand for their product, which the company later on was able to use to claw back some of the profit margins that they had lost over the years to the commodification of their product. And so this was a tremendous success, not just for the company, but as you might imagine, for the marketing group. You can see this in terms of the model. The first side of it you saw before was the listening part. And actually what you're listening to is silence. You ask the world, what do you think of us? And nothing comes back. We think nothing at all. So then you decide to move, to act, and your response is, well, we're going to declare ourselves here. We're going to talk about the pride we have in our products and our company, and we're going to try to leave an impression on you. And with the Intel Inside campaign, that's precisely what they were able to do. But the marketers, being marketers, didn't stop there. And what they ended up doing was taking that campaign one step further. Now, you may recognize this as the old Intel logo. What has happened since then is the little E went up in the air, and the circle from the Intel Inside campaign is now a part of the corporate brand of the Intel Corporation. If you notice, the symbolic significance of this is that the history of the Intel Inside campaign is now a prominent part of the statement of who we are, our identity as an organization. And so the marketers are able to sneak that story into every story of the Intel company now that they have managed to have such a huge success. I'm sorry to say they're still working on the engineers. They're not entirely convinced that marketing matters, but they have seen a little bit of progress in this regard.